Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. So many of you will know Ryan Turnipseed from my streams as kind of like the Microsoft Clippy, but for arcane historical knowledge. If you want to understand more about the context of why you have a particular policy in American history or why we ended up with this bureaucracy, you just kind of click on Ryan and he pops up and he explains what's going on. He stores his vast historical knowledge in his glorious mane of hair, which is why he must retain it. And so, he's often been on to explain different periods of American history and why we end up in certain situations that we have. However, today I'm having Ryan on for a different reason. Those who have followed him on Twitter may be aware of the fact that unfortunately he has faced some very serious difficulties with his church. Has led to now an excommunication. And I know Ryan personally. He is a guy who's young but has a great character, and I think truly loves the Lord. And I think what's been done to him is quite evil. And so I want to have him on to explain in his own words what has happened here, because I think it's important that people understand what is going on in the background of many of their churches. While the churches might come out and talk a good game about being very conservative and orthodox and having this kind of front, often there are people working inside the church to change that and trying to go ahead and cancel or push out anybody who might question the actions that they're taking. So, Ryan, thank you for coming on, man. I really appreciate you joining me to tell your story.
Thank you very much for having me. It means a great deal to me.
So the first thing I want to do, because like I said, I've met you in person. We've talked. I'm familiar with your character, and I think that first and foremost, it's important to people to understand kind of the ground of your faith, because a lot of people will look at this and they'll say, well, this guy's a rabble rouser. He's just trying to create trouble. He's just, an edgy guy who's trying to go ahead and sow discord in the church. And I know this is not who you are at all. So I wonder if you could start maybe from the beginning, explaining, how you came to faith in Christ, your experience with the Lutheran Church. Maybe go ahead and tell people a little bit about the LCMS so that they have an idea of kind of the history of this denomination, why it has the reputation it does.
Yeah. So I was raised for the majority of my life as a Southern Baptist. Growing up in Oklahoma, if you're a Protestant, that's likely what you're going to be just by default. And that's how I was raised. My family or my great grandparents took me to church pretty regularly as a child. But despite that, the only major Protestant private school in this town that I grew up in, Ponca City in Oklahoma, was a Lutheran private school. The LCMS, if I remember correctly, has the largest network of Protestant private schools in the country. So it's the Protestant equivalent of sort of like the Roman Catholic schooling system. And that's where I went to school from pre-kindergarten, whatever age that'd be, 3 or 4, I don't quite remember, up until the end of the 8th grade, going into high school. That's when this school system stopped. So the entire time that I was in that school system, I was a Southern Baptist. That's where I attended church, and that was the theology that I grew up with. But the church that I and my family had gone to since I was really little, one of the oldest Baptist churches in the county, basically just sort of fizzled out and closed down. And at that point in time, I and the rest of my family were wondering, well, what do we do about church? What are we going to do? And so we started looking at everything that was around us and really reading into them instead of just going to church because it was the social convention. We actually started examining, what do we believe, what lines up with Scripture, and that led us to this Lutheran Church, the part of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod that you mentioned earlier, the LCMS, because they're supposed to be the beating heart of conservative Lutheranism, one of the big mainstays of conservative Protestantism. And that's where we started attending. The rationale was that they weren't too weird. We would go check them out, see if they held up to what we were hoping for, and that's what we found. We found something very good. The preaching was solid. The service was normal. You didn't have some of the stranger excesses that you could find in very contemporary Baptist churches that drove us away from the rest of the Baptists in town, certainly. And that's sort of where we ended up. We read into the Lutheran confessions. The small catechism was required to you're required to uphold that to join a Lutheran congregation. So that's the same small catechism that was written by Martin Luther almost 5 centuries ago. So there was a very strong doctrinal strength, at very least on paper. And so this was appealing. And then after my family and I joined this church, I started looking at other confessions because this was completely foreign to me, having grown up in a very sort of non-creedal or non-confessional religious community. So I started looking at the other ones, and I became more firm in Lutheranism. I found that the Lutheran confessions, at the very least to me and to my family, really held up to Scripture better than, say, the Calvinist confessions or the 39 Articles of the Anglican Church or something like that. So that was we were converts. This would have been, I was a sophomore in high school. I think maybe the age of 15, somewhere around there, was when we started proclaiming ourselves Lutheran. And this was good. This wasn't like, we weren't looking for the political church or something like that. We were looking for a Christian church that wasn't crazy and was also Protestant. So this is where we were drawn to, was this church that, as we found out, had a very good reputation for being the conservative Lutheran church, if not in North America, then the whole world. Certainly responsible for a great deal of mission efforts across the globe for this conservative Lutheran strand. So we were happy with this, and that's sort of how I and the rest of my family was drawn there. So it was certainly out of devotion and checking against Scripture that we were drawn to this organization, and it had at the time certainly a deserved reputation for being conservative. They would speak very harshly against things like abortion, both I would say extracurricularly, whatever that would be for a church, sort of outside the pulpit and inside. They had a very strong adherence to old doctrine. Certainly that's if you go to a good Lutheran church, that's what you're going to get during confirmation, is this, they will be drudging up old doctrine that certainly most modern people would discard out of hand because it's old. That's exactly what we were looking for. So this was a godsend, this conservative Christianity that was a little bit more structured. So that's the draw on our side.
And I think that's really important for people to understand because, like you said, the Christianity was, I think, due, of course, in large part to just the continuity of your family. It was your family's faith. It's something that you had early on, but the choice to move into this particular denomination was one based, like you said, on what you felt was doctrinal accuracies. It's something that you felt was sound theology. This is what you admired about it. This is also what I had heard about this church, is like, look, if you're going to do Lutheranism, these are the guys who are holding fast. These are the guys who are the bulwark against kind of progressive indoctrination. And so it makes perfect sense that if you were going to make that move, that this is what you're looking for, and this is why you selected it. And I think that's really what leads us to our next point, which is what kind of started this ball rolling, because there was a shift suggested, I believe, and I'll let you explain in more detail, but there was a shift suggested in the doctrine of the church, the declarations of the church, and much of it was concerning in its willingness to draw equivocations, to go ahead and liberalize certain aspects, or not going completely woke, but very clearly making a substantial shift in the direction of affirming many modern conceptions of what Christian doctrine should be, or how Christian morality should frame certain issues. And when you went ahead and shared this widely in a way that it hadn't been done before, most people didn't recognize it. It feels like that is when you started to have problems then with, you were targeted by church leadership for what you had shared.
Right. So, and in the lead up to this in 2022, there was the LCMS has what's called a National Youth Gathering, where the congregations are at least encouraged to send their I think it's like middle school to high school children, maybe just high school. I can't quite remember the age range. Sort of in that range, to some sort of a youth gathering, which is a very modern thing, but nothing inherently wrong with it on the face of it. In this 2022 gathering, there was breakout sessions for these children, these young people, that were led by organizations like Lutherans for Racial Justice and all this other stuff. So I pointed this out in 2022, as did many others. So we already knew that maybe there's everything's not perfect, and there is certainly some sort of battle happening under the surface, very non-publicly. The fact that this Lutherans for Racial Justice group, which does exactly what you'd think it does based on the name, just looking at any other institution around us in the world, the fact that they'd be teaching children was quite a shock to many people, and certainly in the capacity that they were. And then at the start of 2023, so a few months later, the publishing house for the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, Concordia Publishing House, with the full support of of every major hierarch in the Synod and the bureaucracy, theological review boards, and whatever else, put out an edition of Luther's Large Catechism that had the catechism completely unchanged, but also bound to dozens and dozens of essays that were, quite frankly, subversive. So you had one essay on the Lutheran Sixth Commandment, which is the one on adultery, thou shalt not commit adultery, and talking about the nature of sexual sins, equalizing sexual sins all the way from fornication to pedophilia, to pornography, homosexuality, transgenderism, and everything in between, saying that they're all equally as bad, and on top of that, then saying that if you struggle with some sort of sexual sin, even if it's just fornication, that is worse than another person outside of you being a pedophile, something like that. Because and they heavily abused the gospel selection. You should deal with the speck in your own eye, or the log in your own eye, rather than the speck in your neighbor's. So that was in the essay on the Sixth Commandment. There was a essay that was not tied to any of the commandments, that was specifically on, and this is in the title, incorporating social justice into Lutheran theology, and all this other stuff. So this is just a sampling, but quite a few other ones were just as bad and worse in other capacities. And this is especially egregious because a catechism is meant to teach faith to people. That's the point. It's the very basics of Christianity. If you need to know what to believe to get into Christianity, if you are educating children, if you're educating adults, that's what this large catechism is for. Educating pastors, even, you go to a catechism. And so to have even things that are ambiguous, let alone wrong, in this volume is quite frankly unacceptable. So I and many other people raised the alarm bells. It was thanks to you and many other gentlemen with large accounts that got this thing rolling in the public eye. And the president of the LCMS eventually pulled it because he agreed there were some very egregious mistakes in this catechism. And this would have been towards the end of January last year. And then a few weeks later, after succumbing to internal pressure, he re-released it, reaffirmed it, said it was a great volume, and also said things could have been worded a little better. So, we're already throwing out standards for things like catechisms.
Yeah, and this is really concerning because, of course, this is something we see over and over again. We all know that, unfortunately, many mainline Protestant denominations, and sadly, inside certain aspects of the Catholic Church, we see this constant push to liberalize, to modernize, to weaken the doctrine, to change the truth of God's word with the times. And even in many of the denominations that have a reputation for being conservative, for standing firm on these doctrines, there's always this constant subversive element. Of course, the Southern Baptist Convention is dealing with this. Obviously, the LCMS is dealing with this. Denominations that are known for standing firm when other denominations are folding, the people don't want it. It seems like the congregations are not interested in this. Like you said, you chose your denomination specifically due to its conservative dictates. And yet the leadership is really, really vulnerable. and in many cases often leading this revolution from inside. And it always happens the same way, right? As you're talking about here, it's not a direct, they don't walk right up to and deny the word, right? But what they do is they play this game of, well, maybe these things are equal. Well, maybe these are all just, it's just one of many problems, right? Like, well, maybe at the end of the day, we should embrace certain aspects of these different movements. There are parts of this that are okay, ignoring all the subversive parts, ignoring how, 90% of social justice is really just a veil for progressive atheism, while 10% of it might reference something that God actually wants us to do, to care for our neighbor or seek justice in our communities. They play this game on purpose because they know if they can subvert part of this, if they can get the language changed, if they can go ahead and start introducing parts of the concepts and making them something that people are comfortable with, eventually they can use that to go ahead and then eventually erode the actual doctrine itself. And so I think you're right to go ahead and raise alarms about this. I think that unfortunately this is a process that we see over and over again in many denominations. And the fact that the leadership saw this problem, but then backtracked and affirmed the problem once they had been risen, really shows you that ultimately they're not accountable to the congregation and they're not accountable to God's word. They seem to be mostly accountable to these liberalizing forces in leadership, which should concern everyone involved with these denominations. So after this came out and after you had shared what was going on, there had been this response. That's, again, like we said, when you started to see, I think, a shift in the way that the church was approaching you, leadership was approaching you. So can you explain what happened after that thread came out, after you had shared these changes in the catechism? What was the posture of many of these leaders? How did they start approaching you?
Yeah, so, and this might be worth noting here at the outset. This leadership in the LCMS, it's not like there was some liberal coup and the liberal faction got in charge and that's why this crackdown is the way it was. This is the conservative leadership. This is the mainstream conservative faction of this conservative church. They pride themselves on how conservative they are because they go to pro-life marches, they vote Republican and whatever else, as if that means something as to the rest of their actions. This is the conservative hierarchy within this organization. So let that inform everything that's been said so far and that's about to be said. So after this publication was re-released and reaffirmed, the president of the LCMS, Matthew Harrison, he put out a letter in February. I think it was February 21st. Either on or around Ash Wednesday of that year, if you want to get symbolic about things, where he called for the excommunication of the alt-right from the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod and blamed the alt-right on causing the catechism controversy. Not the publishers or the people that he said could have worded things better or anything like that. It was the alt-right. That was the words he used. This wasn't a letter from 2017 or 16. This is last year.
Like some kind of Vox journalist. It's the alt-right hiding in the weeds. Yeah.
Yeah, right. As if I'm even old enough to have been affiliated with the alt-right in my life. So that's that was the thing that he put out. And in that he had
thank you for making me feel real old, because I just realized that you are too young. You would have been like playing with like Yu-Gi-Oh cards when the alt-right was anything of note in the public culture. But go ahead.
Yeah, I was in 8th grade when the 2016 election was going on. So like that was the and that's the end of the alt-right, sort of around that time. So that was the word he dredged up. He exhumed that from the graveyard. And branded us with that. And if you want to talk about theological details, he offered categorical condemnations of sin for a bunch of different things that sound really scary, but if you just look at Scripture for more than 5 seconds, you'll see that it's a pretty big issue that he condemned these things. So I'll take perhaps the scariest sounding one that he condemned categorically. So without exception, in all cases, the president of the LCMS, speaking on behalf of every congregation, the district presidents and whatever else, condemned categorically genocide. And that's really scary. Surely everyone should just categorically condemn genocide until you realize that God omnicided the earth except for, I think, 8 people in Genesis. So if there is such a thing as a categorical condemnation for this, God himself is guilty of this sin. So there's already a theological issue here. Maybe perhaps they are drawing scary accusations out from the darkness to label people with, when really it has nothing to do with the issue at hand, like this subversive catechism that was published. So that was the letter. Very sloppily written, theologically not sound. It's using outdated political language to accuse opponents of their great catechism. And then come March, I find out through my campus pastor, he's basically the equivalent of an overseer for this geographic region in northern Oklahoma. He and my pastor back at home in Ponca City informed the elders of Ponca City, excluding my dad, who was an elder. He got a separate email that was a little bit less detailed, that I was going to have to be talked to because my online activity was deeply concerning to them. That was the words that they used, deeply concerned. So that's that was the start of this. I met with that campus pastor quite a few times to try to figure out what was going on. The first meeting was much more jovial, sort of just like they're checking off a checklist. We have to make sure what we all know and make sure that you're a normal Christian and you aren't too scary and far right. That was the first meeting. We left in good spirits. And then come the second meeting, it was much more dour. He was much more afraid. I was told that word had come down from on high to examine me, which is not how the LCMS is supposed to work. It's more congregationalist in polity than it is top-down. And that was sort of the first sign that something was really happening here. The other sign that was sort of more implicit was the fact that a series of laymen had been gone after by the Synod up until this point. So basically, immediately after Harrison's letter was published, there was a layman who most people consider too far right to defend. That's how these things always start, down the slippery slope towards the left, is they pick a target that you can't respectably defend, and they do everything wrong against him, set the precedents, get the bureaucracy sort of accustomed to their new role as witch hunters or whatever else. They had police exclude this man from his church property, and they excommunicated him while he wasn't present. So that's a whole bunch of stuff wrong there. It's not how it's supposed to go. That was the first guy. They then forced his friend out of the congregation by social pressure. That's not Christian in the slightest. And then in Oklahoma, just about a week before any of my stuff happened, or maybe 2 weeks, very quickly before my stuff happened, there was an elder in a congregation who was pressured to resign his eldership because he had associated with these far-right elements and criticized the catechism in public. And he gave in to the pressure, unfortunately, but that's the way it goes. Most people aren't meant to stand up to pressure against people that they thought were supposed to protect them. And then at the end of the meeting, he asks for the recording of the meeting, because the other side had been keeping a audio recording of the whole thing, and he was denied a recording. So the other side denied him the recording of their meeting, refused to give it to him. And so I brought that up with the campus pastor, who's this overseer type figure. And I said, is this going to happen with me? You know, what is this allowed? Is this legitimate? Is this what Christians do? And the thing I was told at the end of this whole line of questioning was, well, why didn't he record it himself? So from then on out, I was recording absolutely everything that was involved with me, with them. Thankfully, I did so. And eventually I was brought in for questioning. I was told to denounce a group of people's persons. Not their ideas or their statements or beliefs, but their persons. And if you want to know what that is or what that entails, what the details are, you're not going to get an answer, because I didn't get one during that meeting either. So that was what I was told to do at that meeting. I offered to go through beliefs, to actually tell them what I believed about things so that they could examine me properly, and they refused. They said that I was trying to litigate out the meeting, trying to drag it out and all this other stuff, as if Christians aren't supposed to go off of beliefs and faith, but off of associations and political affiliations. So that's how this meeting ended. I refused to give in. This was it was a very abortive meeting. It was not organized properly, and that was even recognized on the other side. I received an apology by text message from the guy who organized it, the pastor here in Ponca City. He apologized for mishandling the meeting. And then as time goes on, sort of went quiet for a few weeks. And then my father informed me in an elders meeting that, and this is their words, they wanted to put me through a tribunal to question my beliefs and associations. Very, very Christian point of organization. I remember the holy tribunals that were held in the New Testament. That's definitely how it works. So I reached out to them and basically just said, hey, if you want to hold a tribunal against me, these are the things I'm going to need done to trust it. And that included that they wouldn't try to pressure me to give up my public voice online, that they wouldn't try to, that I would be allowed the recording of the meeting, and all this other stuff. And I just denied all of that, so the meeting never happened. And then a few weeks later, after this whole thing sort of degenerated even further, I tried to call up the hierarchy. There's no official system of appeals to go to a higher authority and say, hey, this is being done wrong. Can I have a better meeting or something like that? That doesn't exist. So I just tried to call up the hierarchy informally. I called the district president of the Oklahoma district, Reverend Narens. I called a Synod vice president, and I just got no calls back at all. Radio silence from anyone up the chain. So, I was very much left in the darkness. And so I think it was May 18th, if I remember correctly, of last year, a few weeks after the tribunal organization fell through, I published all the recordings that I had on Twitter on my account, just to show everyone, hey, this is what's going on. They've recorded other people, so this is why I recorded this, and they've basically deprived me of any recourse. That if any of this was done wrong, they've deprived me of a second chance or something to get a fair hearing. So that went out last May, and then a couple of days later, I received by email a notice that I had been put under what's called the minor ban. This is like the step before excommunication within Lutheranism, and for context, usually the application for the minor ban is against, say, cohabitating couples. So say a pastor finds that a couple is cohabitating in his congregation, and they don't immediately fix it. Well, he puts them under the minor ban to sort of show them the weight of the issue. Marry or move out, or you're not going to receive communion here. It's like a stopgap measure, a very quick response. So it's a practical concern. You typically don't use it because the congregant is affiliating with people that you don't like online. That was two of the charges against me. One of the other charges was I had disrespected their authority because I didn't give in to these charges, which they just presumed to be completely true and absolutely correct. And then the other two charges were that I had wrongly criticized the catechism that was put out last January. So 2/5 of my charges for having with communion, a sacrament, withheld from me, was tied to my criticisms of this catechism from last January, and that was the end of the story until very recently.
It has to have a good slice of irony here that a denomination literally named for someone who criticized the corruption of church doctrine went after you and tried to completely destroy you for pointing out the corruption of church doctrine, and that they would hold that simply pointing that out, not going out of your way to hurt anyone, not preaching a false gospel, not just simply pointing out that they themselves were going through the process of corrupting the truth of God's word is enough to go ahead and ban you from what is supposed to be a very conservative denomination. I think that it's pretty clear here that what you have is a scenario where guys got caught. They got embarrassed by someone who was willing to stand up against this corruption. And then they started looking for reasons to go ahead and kind of push against you. The fact that they would go ahead and demand, your denial of people, and you would offer and say, well, what did they do? Let's talk about this. Let's, rather than just, give some blanket declaration, go ahead and let me know what they've committed, what lies they've told, and we can discuss this. But no, none of this is acceptable. And of course, the fact that you recorded this so that it was clear how corrupt this process was, I think ultimately puts them in a position where they have to go ahead and deny all of this and then push for this, even though very clearly what you're seeing is just a kangaroo court. You don't have any proper application of established institutions. You're using instruments of church discipline in ways that they would never otherwise be used. And the truth, let's be honest, church discipline is something that is ignored in pretty much all churches at this point, right? Like we
Right.
see
Yeah.
this pretty consistently. People carry on relationships, they engage in open sin. Uh, they are proud about those facts. They advocate for political positions that go directly against church teachings on things like being, pro-life and whatnot, and they suffer none of the treatment that you received here. And the
Right.
fact that a conservative denomination would go after you saying you're too right wing, while other people who openly advocate against church doctrine continue to receive communion and have no church discipline, really shows, I think, where they line up, right? It shows how willing they are to go ahead and push only in one direction. And they feel very strongly like they can get away with pushing against that and using leftist tactics, using
Right.
leftist morality, using progressive social cancel culture against you that they would never use against people who are more left-wing and violating quite openly church doctrine, because they know they can use the power of leftist social pressure and not feeling heat from the outside when they do it.
Right, and that's exactly right. At the very least, this illustrates that it's a choice who they go after. They have the means to stop all of the leftward slide that we've seen for the last 20 years or so. They just haven't. It's when their respectability is threatened that they start to go after people, laymen in particular. That's a very egregious thing, is that the president of the Synod was going after laymen, these laity, just non-ordained men in congregations that had no actual official association with the Synod hierarchy itself, just the congregation. That was what threatened them the most out of the last 20 years or so. So, I should mention this, is that I can finish off the story here for just like 2 minutes,
Sure.
because there was just a little bit more things that happened this year that really highlight how much of a choice this was for these conservatives to go after the people to their right, and that was the only target that they've had for the entire time they've ran this conservative denomination. Is that earlier this year I had a bunch of pastors reach out to me from across the country and basically just said, hey, why don't you reach out to Pastor Hiley at this at the Lutheran Church of Ponca City and try to achieve some sort of reconciliation. And since I'm not out to just pick a fight, I said, sure, I can do that. Reached out very amicably, and this process of trying to just get a meeting set up to where he and I could meet, I could bring, like I say, a silent witness was the thing that I was advocating, not a recording or even minutes taken, just a silent witness to come with me, and we could just get the charges clarified, because these charges were very sloppy that were handed to me. There were grammatical errors and doctrinal vagaries and inconsistencies, so we were just giving them a chance to clarify the charges, and then maybe a second meeting to discuss them, not dispute them or argue them or whatever else, but just discuss the nature of the charges, why they were being done, if they were being pressured at all from the hierarchy. That's something that we've been wondering this whole time. We don't have direct proof, but every action that's taken by Hiley at this congregation, First Lutheran, seems to signal that there is pressure coming down from on high. So it took months for this meeting to even get off the ground. And then when they finally accepted, all right, we have dates that that this meeting can happen on. I was told in an email that had a completely different font size, a different tone, different sign off, still had Hiley's name signed to it though, that there would be no witness, that the purpose of this meeting was now for me to come to repentance, not to discuss anything, and that was those things are unacceptable, especially denying someone a witness at these private meetings ostensibly. And this was where this broke down, and I eventually I responded to this heatedly, but a whole bunch of people read over this and they said that the heat wasn't in sinful excess, because this was egregious, this was obscene. To just accept it politely would be a lack of consequence that should exist for just abusing someone like this. Was the line that was given. I responded and I said, all right, fine, I'll give up the witness. We can have this thing dictated to me, but I'm recording the meeting. I have to have a record of this from myself. That was denied to me, and so this meeting never happened. This is April by this point, so this has dragged on for months. And at the start of April 8th, at about 9:30 in the morning, I handed in a letter to this congregation in Ponca City, that said I rescind all of my spiritual ties and any sort of associations that I have with any of you. I quit the congregation is the summary of this page-long letter. So I thought that was the end of it. A few weeks roll by, so weeks pass, and I receive an email that says, and in fact, this is the short email that is very quick for me to read out. This would be April 24th, 9 o'clock in the morning exactly, from Pastor Hiley, First Lutheran Church, Ponca City, that says, Ryan, in light of your continued impenitence and your refusal to submit to church discipline, Pastor Hiley and the Board of Elders will present the case for your excommunication to the congregation on Sunday, May the 5th, immediately after the conclusion of the divine service. You are invited to be present for the proceedings. So, weeks after I had quit the congregation, basically, that would be the dissolution of their jurisdiction over me, because this is, once again, a more congregationalist polity, like you would find in most of the other Protestant churches in the United States. They're saying, all right, now we're going to take official action against you that's binding across the whole denomination, and we're going to capital E excommunicate you. So if this is done, if this is accepted as valid, if it were to happen, that would bar me from the altar at any LCMS congregation if this is accepted as valid. Just emphasizing that. And further to this insult, basically, that's what I would consider this. You are invited to be present for the proceedings, not when can you be present, can you make it, or something else. Can you represent yourself, have a voice, can you at least witness it? No, you're invited. It's going to happen whether I am there or not, and that's exactly what happened, because I had an obligation that day. I was in Tulsa for something professional. This was not a superfluous activity, something recreational. I had to be in Tulsa May the 5th on that Sunday afternoon. So I wasn't there. They went ahead with the proceedings. They changed the rules. If someone abstained from the voting, they just didn't acknowledge that person was there. So they could have their coveted unanimous vote against me. They acknowledged that I had rescinded my membership, but they said they weren't going to accept it, as if that was required. And the stated reasoning given was that this was a punitive measure. That was their words. This was a punitive action because if a child does something terribly wrong and stops right before, say, a line is crossed, you still punish them because they stopped, you don't give away the punishment. So that's not how excommunications are supposed to work in the Lutheran Church, especially given our history. They are not punitive. They are not punitive social pressures. They're meant to. It's the last possible opportunity that the Church can take to bring someone back into the fold, and it's supposed to just show the person the weight of the sin. So this is like if you have an adulterer or someone that refuses to acknowledge that what they're doing is wrong, and they resist every attempt up until that point, every possible alternative. You level the excommunication against them in hopes that shows them, maybe I'm the one that's wrong, not everyone else around me. Well, in this case, they acknowledge that this is a punitive measure, something meant to punish me for having done all of these things like criticize their catechism, associate with people they didn't like. And they passed the vote. People abstained. They said, we're just going to ignore that. They pronounced a unanimous vote. And this was read out on a video that's on their Facebook and YouTube on May the 12th. On that morning in the church service, Pastor Hiley pronounced me excommunicated. They made it public. And that's where this ends. So we're at a point now to where if pastors, especially, or laity that want to talk to their pastors about this in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod don't want this to stand, we need people to recognize that this is not valid, because at the very least, this is procedurally invalid. They didn't follow procedure. Morally, that's even worse. Like, what have I done wrong that warrants a capital E excommunication? There's certainly nothing that we have leveled in the history of the Lutheran Church against anybody. So this is a completely new precedent after centuries that this is being done.
So I have to ask you, obviously, with this level of animus from much of the church leadership, when you see, them embracing kind of a liberalized catechism or the doctrine around it, when other people watch that, what has been their response? I mean, they saw the things you saw, they saw the language used, they saw the kind of two-step that the leadership used to go ahead and push this through, and then they saw the response and kind of the targeting of you for bringing up questions that even the leadership themselves acknowledge were valid before doubling down on these changes. have there been pastors? Have there been leaders? Has there been a response of people saying, this is not okay, this is not how we treat people? Have you had any support from people who maybe are not directly in leadership but are in places of leadership somewhere in the church and find what's happened to you appalling?
So far, there's been murmurs in the background from especially the more conservative side of things, the support base of the current administration that's running the synod. There is a lot of, I know for a fact there's a lot of people, laity and clergy, talking about how appalling this is, and that's all that I really know at this moment. But I am rather optimistic that there will be some sort of concerted effort to invalidate this. And once again, that's just done by pastors saying, I'm not going to acknowledge this excommunication. I have a feeling that something will be done. I am optimistic, and that's why I'm not giving up on this whole thing just yet. On just the optimism grounds, and also because this is, if there is something wrong here, it's the LCMS and not necessarily the Lutheran theology that predates the LCMS by a few centuries. So I am optimistic that something will be done, especially because this is sort of like a this is intolerable. This is the point of intolerability for the vast majority of the pastorate, even for just mildly conservative pastors. Is this we've had all of these years of abuses of how the churches are organized, the liturgy of the services, of doctrine, people watering things down and preaching things that are very very soft on what the world likes, and shying away from condemning things that the world likes as well. We've had all this time, and the Synod has basically just said our hands are tied. We can't rock the boat too terribly hard. We just have to live with people we disagree with and whatnot else. But finally, now that someone too far to the right has spoken up, at least by their view, finally, now that that has happened, they pronounce me to be not a Christian, damned to hell, outside the church and whatnot else. It's showing a lot of these pastors that, the Synod's hands weren't tied this entire time. They chose not to act. And I do have a pretty good feeling that something will be done about this. So I'm not giving up on it, and that's all that I really know. I'm not in on any secret circles of administrators or bureaucrats or clergy or laity or whatever else of like some secret planned rebellion. That's not what I'm a part of. I'm just purely involved in whatever's around me. So that's the state of things. And I will say it is absolutely certain that nothing will happen if the word doesn't get out, if people don't start talking about this, especially to people that they think are uninvolved, because with an excommunication, this is now no longer just some local issue. A church has pronounced me basically untouchable to these other congregations, certainly when it comes to receiving the sacrament at the altar. This is something that concerns everybody now. It's on them to uphold it if I were to show up at their church. So this is now a very public matter. Certainly, they publicized it first that I was excommunicated, so they see it as a public matter as well. They put it up on Facebook and YouTube. If something's on the internet, it's as public as can be. So that's what I was taught at this school that I went to, attached to this church. So it behooves everyone now to just spread the word and see. Is this tolerable? That would be a great question to ask anybody, laity, clergy, and whatever else. Is this tolerable that this person should be declared damned, should be declared outside the church, should be not welcomed here because this congregation supposedly did things above board? That's the narrative that they are running with to make this valid. It behooves everyone to spread that word.
Yeah, it really is outrageous. Again, church discipline is something that is so rarely exercised. And people get away with literally murder without facing often, this kind of opposition. And the fact that they would level this at someone who seems very sincerely to be following the faith and concerned with simply keeping accurate church doctrine, that they would turn on you in a way that seems almost entirely politically motivated is pretty heinous. And so I hope that you're right. I admire your optimism. I admire your stand here. I think that's probably in the right tradition of a Lutheran. And I think that I hope ultimately that there are people who see kind of how this has been done. Because if you let stuff like this stand, then really, what is the purpose of the church if you are not able to recognize that something like this is just standing against everything that you really should be doing as a church that is interested in following Christ and standing for the word. I think it's really important that people, like you said, take notice of what's happening here and push back against it. So thank you, Ryan, for coming on. We've got a number of questions from the people here. I know that you've been very busy, but from time to time you do operate a YouTube channel and have or write for Substacks. Do you want to point anybody to anything that you have going on before we go to the questions of the people?
Yeah, gladly. So, my Twitter account, where you can find the primary source information of all of this, is at Turnip Merchant, or it's under my name, Ryan Turnipseed. You can find it under either of those on Twitter. You can find the recordings, the documents, the emails, and whatever else that led up to this. Their announcement that the church made on their Facebook. You can find all that there if you are inclined to know more. And I should also mention as well, I'm not asking anyone to agree with me on any of my views at all. I'm just sincerely pointing out that this is not a Christian process, that this is not Christian. That's why I provide this documentation. So none of this is a call for people to rally behind even me or my beliefs, but rather to rally behind some sort of Christianity. So if you want to see the case for that, that's on my Twitter that I just mentioned. Outside of all of this, on my YouTube channel, Ryan Turnipseed, you can find things that delve more into political theory, history, religion, and whatever else. I recently just finished a short series on neoconservatism and what they wrote. So if you hear people being called neocon as a pejorative, you can go watch that to find out it's even worse than what that pejorative is implying. So you can find that, Ryan Turnipseed, on YouTube. And then the Old Glory Club is hosting a conference. Our first annual conference is coming up at the, I think it's June 7th, if I remember correctly. Yes, June 7th, Friday, June 7th is when this conference starts. There are single-digit numbers of tickets left if anyone wants to attend. This is going to be an excellent conference, not least because Mr. MacIntyre, you're going to be there as well, giving a lecture. So you can find me also on that Old Glory Club Substack, where I have some older articles there that were written when I had time before all this kicked off, talking about legal stuff. So the Civil Rights Acts, I delved into the Civil Rights Acts from the 1950s and actually went line by line explaining why this is a tyrannical overreach. But I would absolutely encourage anyone to attend that Old Glory Club conference, at the very least because it's a group of very normal and well-accomplished people, usually family men, very intelligent, people that are sane politically and historically, people on the right that are uncompromising, not ashamed of it, and trying to actually find truth. You know, they're not looking through a filter of what will people accept. They're looking through a filter of what's true. So I would encourage everyone to go check that out while the time the tickets are still available, but that's quickly running out. So that's where I direct people.
Absolutely. All right, guys, let's take a look at your questions. Wolfbane says, have you or Ryan Turnipseed heard of the Corbin Society, their YouTube channel club trying to work out NRX thought in the real world, or have with real world application and with fun SW language? I can't say that I have seen that YouTube channel. Have you, Ryan?
No, I have not, unfortunately.
Okay. But now we know about it, so thank you very much. Appreciate that. Let's see. We've got Evan M here who says, anybody who thinks Ryan is just a rabble rouser in the Lutheran Church may want to look up an obscure rabble rouser named Martin Luther. Yeah. Well done. Yes, absolutely. Let's see here. Arthur T, $50. Thank you very much, man. Appreciate support of the channel. Modern Christianity will have to stop being the shadow that follows the world's radicalism, or it will cease to exist at all. One cannot serve two masters. Are more schisms amongst denominations in store for the future? Yeah, it's pretty clear that there is a huge battle in most denominations. Again, I think between kind of the top leadership, especially those plugged into centralized organizations, and the actual people, the actual congregations, and the local leadership. I think we're seeing that again, sadly, across many different denominations, even those that are traditionally thought of as being conservative. I hope that these denominations are able to stand against this. I hope that that doesn't require schism, but that means, as Ryan has pointed out, that you need people to take notice, people to take action, to say something, to care when things like this happen. Because if these leaders are able to go ahead and manipulate procedures and push down, liberalizing doctrine without any intervention, anyone standing up against it, and punish those who would notice it, then I think, unfortunately, you're going to see these once venerable organizations continue to erode.
Right, and very briefly, I know I'm not supposed to bring up new topics and closing statements, but just very briefly, because it should be self-explanatory. Once again, this is done at the behest of the older generation of conservative leadership. This is not a liberal faction doing all this. This is good, respectable conservatives and good, respectable conservative academics pushing all of this. And if you want to get into the sort of like the psychology behind it, if I could offer an opinion, it's because they think they are definitionally conservative. They're pro-life. They vote for the GOP come election time. They're in the conservative denomination and leading it. So anything they do must be conservative because they are the conservatives by definition. And especially in this older generation, anyone that follows this older generation of conservatism, it's absolutely led to an atrophy. They aren't actually doing anything right-wing or conservative or traditional anymore. They're just going along with whatever's convenient, whatever's expedient, whatever the world likes, while branding it conservative. And that's definitely the mindset that has let all of this keep sliding ever faster leftward.
Right. If I am the conservative edge, if I'm the conservative gatekeeper, then whatever I say, therefore, is the most conservative thing. There can't be any way in which I've erred.
Exactly.
Creeper Weirdo says Big Eva just wants a secular culture senpai to notice them and say they're one of the good ones. Sad, pathetic, and non-heterosexual. Yeah, unfortunately, that is so often the case. They're really just looking for that pat on the head. They really just want to know that they're one of the good ones. It's really interesting that over and over again, we see again the church leadership go ahead and try to sneak this stuff in. David French obviously was going to be at I don't know why the denomination's name is suddenly escaping me.
The PCA, the Presbyterian Church of
Thank
America.
you. Yeah, the Presbyterian, their big conference here. You just, and then they got the blowback that they got from their crowd. Again, it's the leadership versus these the rest of the congregation that really does not want this. They do not want this. That's why they're in the places they're in, because they want to see someone who's willing to push back against this stuff. But unfortunately, we just see the continued attempt to subvert by people who should be leading and protecting these denominations from exactly that type of subversion. Prince of Parma says support. Thank you very much, man. Appreciate it. Let's see here. We've got Paladin YYZ says somebody once said something about hollowing out the institutions and a skin suit. Thank God I no longer engage with politics looking for protection, judges looking for justice, or doctors looking for health. Unfortunately, yeah, we just see this over and over again, this drive to go ahead and hollow out these organizations, but use their credit as their standing as something, as currency, to go ahead and advance an agenda. As Ryan said, so often we have these guys who are using the reputation of conservatism, the idea that people are here for that conservatism, to go ahead and run cover for kind of the subversion that they're bringing to the table, while pretending that they're the most far right, I guess, or conservative that one can be in any given denomination. Paladin also says, good to see you, Ryan. Just asking about you in the OGC chat. I heard you're doing well. And then finally we have Weber Math Plus says, bum that Ryan is going through this. I'm praying for him. Thanks for having him on. Absolutely. And again, of course, I'm sure I feel comfortable speaking for Ryan, saying that he appreciates your prayers. And obviously that is a critical thing in this moment where he is, he's facing a lot of moral and spiritual challenges in this moment. And I think that your prayers are incredibly helpful. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. If it's your first time on this channel, please go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Make sure you go ahead and click the notification, the bell, everything, so that you can catch these streams when they go live. If you'd like to get these broadcasts as podcasts, make sure you go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube, or go ahead and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform, the Auron MacIntyre Show Apple, Spotify, all of those places. If you haven't subscribed to Ryan's stuff, make sure that you do that. You can check out all of his work and the evidence that he's gone ahead and compiled, so you're more familiar with this situation. And of course, we'll both be at the OGC conference. I've had a lot of people asking me about signed copies of the book. Well, the best place to get your book signed is there. I'll be there. I'll be giving a talk. I'll have books for people who haven't bought it yet, and I'll of course be more than happy to sign any copies there. You'll see guys like Ryan and others, some of your favorites, giving speeches or just being around and being able to talk, meet up. It's a great time to network. It's a great time to learn more about organizations that are trying to make a difference in your community. For those of you who are always asking, but what can I do? What can I do? Well, all we do is talk on these things. What can I do? This is ground zero. This is where the rubber meets the road. So if you would like to be involved with that, like Ryan said, there are a few more tickets left, but they are vanishing quickly. So make sure that you go ahead and take an opportunity to plug in and get involved. All right, guys. Thank you everyone for watching. It's been great to talk to you. Please pray for Ryan. I'm sure he appreciates it. And as always, guys, we will talk to you next time.